Oh, I love him, I love him, I love her, I love her. It has to be her or no one else. It has to be him or no one else. So, how many people or how many more people have to die to validate your love? If people have to suffer or die simply because you are in love, then it's not worth it. And I know you'd wonder, why are we talking about love here? But last week was World Sickle Cell Day, which was the 19th of June. And the theme was Global Action, Local Impact, Empowering Communities for Effective Self-Advocacy. And this theme was basically trying to inspire locals to lend their voices, to raise awareness, and to also demand better assistance and care for people living with sickle cell disease. And basically that's what I'm trying to do here, to raise awareness. And raising awareness not because we have no idea or have never heard about sickle cell disease. I would say most people have heard, even though there's the possibility of people who have never heard about it. But most people, I mean, in the current information age, most people must have heard about sickle cell or know someone or people who are living with sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. So raising awareness is just to further remind us and drive it home, put it in our skulls, because sometimes we hear these things and maybe they've not really sat deep within us to understand the impact on the people who suffer them and the impact on the society at large. And so I am here to basically lay emphasis on what we know, and then probably some things we don't know, some things may be new to you. You'll probably be hearing them for the first time. But I'm just here to lay emphasis so that we know that it's people's lives that are at stake here. It doesn't matter what you feel or what your emotions are telling you. And that was why I started with your love does not validate putting another person to suffering. So I will talk briefly about sickle cell disease just to help us to be able to digest what I want to talk about. So, sickle cell disease is a group of inherited blood disorders that affect the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. So, hemoglobin is just a protein that has an oxygen carrying capacity. We know, we learned from biology in school that generally oxygen is carried around the body by blood, and the blood that carries the oxygen is the red blood cells, and what actually does the carrying of the oxygen is the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. So it's a protein. Now this protein has the alpha and the beta chain, and what happens in sickle cell is that there's a mutation on the beta chain of the hemoglobin. I'm trying to make this as digestible as possible. So it's inherited in an autosomal recessive pattern, meaning that for you to have sickle cell disease, that is sickle cell anemia, you have to inherit two of these defective genes, that is one from father and one from mother. And there's also the sickle cell trait. The sickle cell trait is heterozygous, where a person has inherited one normal hemoglobin and one defective hemoglobin. So most of them don't come down with symptoms. They don't have crisis as we see with people with sickle cell anemia. So this defect in the hemoglobin gives the red blood cell a sickle shape. So generally, the red blood cell is roundish, or we can say biconvex in shape, and it's flexible, so it allows it to go through capillaries, and capillaries are very tiny, so it allows the red blood cell to be able to squeeze through capillaries, go through capillaries, and it also allows it to live its lifespan of between 90 to 120 days. But with the defective gene, with the defective hemoglobin rather, that is the hemoglobin S in sickle cell anemia, now the lifespan of the red blood cell is shortened, averagely 17 days. So it means that there's going to be a breakdown of red blood cells before 120 days. And normally, when there's a breakdown, and in this case now, because there's a lot of breakdown, that's why you see them having anemia, like they have low blood level basically. So because red blood cells that are supposed to have lasted for 120 days are now lasting for less, so it means the body has to keep producing more red blood cells, and because of the excessive breakdown of red blood cells as well, you notice that their eyes are yellowing because of jaundice and other um, mucous membranes in the body are yellow because of the excessive breakdown of red blood cells. And also because of this breakdown of red blood cells, our body of course will be programmed to produce more. So um, sometimes you see that they have some changes in their bone structure, such like the forehead. You notice that they have not everybody who has a massive forehead has sickle cell, but you notice that they have bigger foreheads because erythropoiesis, that's the process of producing red blood cells, is now being done in other areas. So we have bone marrow, sorry, we have the bones like the skull doing that. So you see that frontal bossing is what it's called. And then you also notice the jaw, it's called natopathy, because red blood cells are produced from areas where they are normally not produced for. And so because of inability of blood and oxygen to reach areas where the blood vessels have been occluded by the sickle-shaped red blood cells, they come down with this painful crisis. I don't know if you've seen a sickler or a patient with sickle cell anemia in crisis. For some of them, they may present in very distressful pain. It can be pain on the limbs, it can be back pain, it can be abdominal pain, it can be very severe headaches, and for some it's they have problems breathing. You see them, they present with severe distress, respiratory distress. And then for others, over a long time, you realize that maybe when you see some sickle cell patients, they are limping. Probably one limb is longer than the other, which is as a result of something called a vascular necrosis of the femur, of the head of femur. The femur bone is the long bone on our thighs. So there's a lot. I want to believe, if you've seen someone who has sickle cell anemia, you know what I mean. And when they present with their crisis, is really devastating. And you can imagine that as a child, you don't get to play like your mates. The slightest change in weather, you are affected. You just hang out with your friends to play, or you go out, you are affected. Whether it's hot or it's cold, you are affected. Like in school, there are days you are unable to make it to school simply because maybe you've had a crisis or you are so sick and you are in and out of the hospital. That's not a life anybody wants. And that is why I ask again, is your love worth any of this suffering for somebody? And I always have a theory that if you love yourself so much and you think you have to be with each other, and you realize that you are both carriers of the sickle cell traits, you are both AS, if you insist that you must be together, you can go ahead to be together because you say you love yourselves. It is about both of you, but you don't have to involve another person in it. Now that is where I have a problem, where people insist on getting together and then eventually bringing another person into the picture, and the person lives their whole life suffering and in pain. Nobody is against your love. If you love yourselves, you go ahead to get married if you must, but let it be somewhere at the back of your mind that you may not have kids of your own, or you will not have kids of your own. So the moment you are getting married, is either the woman is having a bilateral tubal ligation, or she's having a hysterectomy, or the man is getting a vasectomy. Find ways to prevent pregnancy if you insist on getting married, because I can't even begin to list the symptoms that most of these patients present with. I remember a certain little boy who was just around 4 or 5 years thereabouts. Well, he was a very sweet little boy. He came in the very first time I met him, though. I think they've been coming in and out of the hospital, but the very first time I met him was during my junior posting in pediatrics. And we got to find out that the parents were aware of their genotypes. We've seen many patients in clinic. When you try to ask for history and you ask questions, they tell you things like, okay, I didn't know I was AS, or we did tests in some places and then they said I was AA, my husband was AS, blah blah blah, all those kind of things. So there was a lot of mix up for those people, but for these people, they knew that they were both AS, and these are educated people, but they were so much in love and didn't want anything to separate them. They went ahead, got married, and went ahead and had this child. And for the period of my junior posting and even up until my senior posting, I mean, I kept seeing them in and out of the hospital, even till my 600 level, like at different points, because I was no longer doing pediatrics or O1G, but at different points, I'm just passing and I see them at the emergency pediatric unit. They are there for treatment, something is wrong with the child, and eventually they lost the child. And it was so painful for me. Of course, I'm sure it was painful for them as parents, but it was very painful for me. And it's not a child I even know personally, or so. Then you can imagine people who know this child, and even for the parents themselves, and you can imagine the rigors of being in and out of the hospital, the financial implication, and then all of these things we are talking about, the stress of the hospital stays and the financial implication are on the parents. But imagine the child himself, because most times people would think about, yes, oh, it's going to be stressful on the parents, and if you have the money you can handle it. Of course you can. How about the person who has to deal with the pain? How about the person whose life has been cut short, or about the person whose life is, I don't know, put in a place where they are unable to do activities like their other mates? So it's really really sad. I also remember this incident of a girl who was brought in. I can't remember exactly what she presented, but obviously she came in crisis. She was in severe pain, and it got to the point where she was telling her mom to pray for her, pray for her. So they were going to do a procedure on her, a lumbar puncture, and she was very scared. And she told her mom they needed to pray. I think she was like 14 years. I remember because it also got to me. So they were there, the mom held her hands, they prayed, and that was in the evening, I think, or in the afternoon, while I was in the emergency pediatric unit. And then by evening, or by in the night rather, when I went there, I asked about her. I was told that she was gone, she had died. And it was really saddening for me to see a young girl who had her whole life ahead of her but cut short because of this. And I say this because this is preventable. If it was something we had no control over, I'll probably not be sitting here talking about it. But I say this because it is preventable. So first and foremost, yes, there's treatment, and treatment will treat the symptoms they present with. Of course, most times they will present with anemia, they will present with the pain, whether abdominal or bone pain, whatever kind of pain. Sometimes they will have osteomyelitis. Whatever the case is or complication, treatment will treat those symptoms. And well, recently there is also the bone marrow transplant, which can cure sickle cell. But again, how many people are able to afford a bone marrow transplant? If we are being honest with ourselves, how many of us can afford a bone marrow transplant if we insist on having children that come down with sickle cell anemia? So the best option for us here is prevention. The common saying is prevention is better than cure, and truthfully it is in this case. Best case scenario is prevention. So when you meet your potential love of your life, the first thing you want to ask is, what is your genotype? Especially if you know you are AS. Once you meet somebody, you know something is going to come of this, you should find out what is your genotype. And if the person is AS, you are AS, and you still want to check, you can still go do series of tests. If it is 2 times, 3 times, to validate whatever the results are. And if it still shows you that you are both AS, I'm sorry to break it to you, as painful as it is, it's better you just go your separate ways. Because even the ones who say, oh no, we'll get married but we're not going to have kids, along the line the temptation comes in, you want to have your own kids. And in our environment, most people don't like to adopt anyways. Most people like to have their own kids. So again and again, prevention is the key. And I hear people say things like, well, when I marry, if I'm AS, my wife is AS, from the normal biology class where we are taught the whole crossing in genetics, where you see when they cross AS and AS, there's one AA child, 2 AS children, and 1 SS. And then people are told, or people understand it to be that when we get pregnant, our first child is going to be AA, our second child and third child, they are both going to be AS, whereas the last one, maybe it's just one that will be AS, so we'll just give birth to 3 and then avoid the last one. Well, that's not the case. That's probability. It is the chance. There's a 25% chance of every pregnancy that the child will inherit both mutated genes. Let me break down what I'm trying to say. So from the crossing we learned in biology, so 2 AS parents, the first one says it will give rise to AA, the second will give rise to AS, the third will give rise to AS, and the last will give rise to SS. Now there's a 25% chance of having an AA, because that is 1 in 4. There's a 50% chance of having AS, because from that crossing it is 2 in 4. And then there's 25% chance of having an SS, 1 in 4. That is for each pregnancy, the probability of having an SS. Not that if you have 4 children, the probability of having SS is 1, I be 25%. No, for each pregnancy, meaning that first pregnancy can be can be SS, second can be SS, and I'm sure we've seen it time and time again. So please, let's be educated, let's be aware, and let's take action. It's one thing to be aware and it's another thing to take action. And when we learn today, we should also tell others. There's no your love is not greater than a human life, and if it doesn't work with person A, it will work with person B. I hope that this has been able to convince us and raise awareness on how deeply difficult it is to live with sickle cell anemia. I've watched videos of people online talking about how they hate their parents, how they hate the condition they are in, because as far as they are concerned, their parents put them in this simply because of their love. And I'm just here to tell you that your love is not worth anybody's life. As harsh as it may sound, it is not. And you should go out there with the message, preach it to others, that their love is not worth anybody's life. Their love is not the reason why anyone should suffer. If you have any questions, you can put it down in the comment section. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it has found a place somewhere in your mind, somewhere at the back of your mind, in front of your mind, and you also preach the gospel to others. Thank you for watching, and if you found this interesting and informative, like, share my videos, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time on our next video. Thank you.